Hi, this is Joy, and I want to speak today on a topic called the time of Jacob's trouble. And I want to say that here in Arkansas it is 5 degrees, and I don't know in your area it probably could be colder. And we've had about 6 inches of snow. And my last message was on understanding the rapture in 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, and this goes somewhere along the same subject of the time of Jacob's trouble. So the time of Jacob's trouble is described as a great tribulation period. And Jesus referred to this in Daniel 9, verse 27, when he spoke about it in Matthew 24:15. Daniel 9:27 says he will confirm the covenant, speaking of the Antichrist, with many for 1 week, but in the middle of the week he will end the sacrifice and the offering, and on the temple shall be the abomination of desolations. And at the end of the time, an end shall be put to the desolation. Matthew 24:15, he said, therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of through Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, verse 21, he says, then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, nor ever shall be, indicating here that the great tribulation will begin when the abomination of desolation spoken of in Daniel 9:27 occurs. And since this begins in the middle of the 70th week, we can say the great tribulation begins after the first 3.5 years of that 7-year period. Daniel chapter 12 in verse 11 and 12 also confirms this. From the time the daily sacrifice is taken away, and the abomination that maketh desolate is set up, there will be 1,290 days. That's 3.5 years. When Jesus said in verse 16 of Matthew 24, let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains, this tells us this event is related to the time of Jacob's trouble described by Jeremiah in chapter 30, verses 4 through 7. The Lord spoke concerning Israel and Judea. This is Jeremiah 34 through 7. We have heard a voice of trembling, of fear, and not of peace. Ask now and see whether a man is ever in labor with child. So why do I see every man with his hands on his loins like a woman in labor, and all faces turn pale? For that day is great, none is like it. It is the time of Jacob's trouble, but he shall be saved out of it. So God gave Jacob the name Israel. That's Genesis 32:28. And Jacob is Israel, and this describes a time of trouble for the Jews when they are living back in their land. It will be a terrible day like no other, but Israel or Jacob will be saved out of it. And salvation comes at the end, just as Daniel and Jesus both prophesied. Daniel 12:1 through 3. Beginning with the Great Tribulation, Daniel prophesies, at that time Michael, the great prince, shall stand up, that stands over the children of your people. And there shall be a time of tribulation, such tribulation as has not been from the time that there was a nation on the earth until that time. At that time your people will be delivered, every one that is written in the book. And many of them that sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, some to reproach and everlasting shame. Verse 2. And the wise shall shine as the brightness of the firmament, and of the many righteous as the stars forever and ever. Verse 3. Verse 1 here describes the Great Tribulation. Verse 2 describes the resurrection. And verse 3 describes the rapture. When the saints are caught up into the firmament where the clouds are to meet Jesus, There they are going to shine bright as the stars in their glory with Jesus, just as Daniel describes it. The 5 virgins in the parable of the virgins who were prepared and ready to go with Jesus when he returns were called wise. Daniel refers to these in verse 3 as wise. This is a description of the rapture. Again, if you look at that carefully, in Daniel chapter 12, verse 3, it says, "And the wise shall shine as the brightness of the firmament, and of many righteous as the stars forever and ever." That is describing the rapture, which immediately is spoken of after verse 2, which describes the resurrection of the dead. And verse 1 describes the tribulation, the great tribulation for the Jewish people. So there you have it. Jesus prophesied of the great tribulation in Matthew 24, verses 15 through 21, and verse 22, that the days of the great tribulation would be shortened for the sake of saving the elect out of it. Then Jesus describes how he returns in verse 27 and verse 30 and 31. He comes in the clouds at the sound of a trumpet to gather together his elect from one end of heaven to the other. This will also include the Gentiles. In Joel chapter 2, verse 31 and 32, says, "The sun shall be turned into darkness, and the moon into blood, before the great and terrible day of the Lord. And whosoever calls upon the name of the Lord shall be saved. For in Mount Zion," that's the Temple Mount, "in Mount Zion and Jerusalem shall the saved one be, as the Lord has said, and they that have glad news preach to them that the Lord has called." The event occurring in Matthew 24, verse 40, refers to the time of Jacob's trouble and not the rapture, as many teach. 2 men will be in the field, one will be taken, one will be left. Verse 40. 2 women will be grinding at the mill, one will be taken and the other one left. Verse 41. After Jesus mentioned the abomination of desolation when Israel would enter the great tribulation, he said in verse 18, "Let the one in the field not go back to take his cloak," which likely ties into verse 40, where you could be taken captive and killed, as Jesus said would occur during the time of Jacob's tribulation in verse 9. "They will deliver you up and put you to death, and you will be hated for my name's sake." You see this being fulfilled with the one taken and the other one left in verse 40 and 41. The Antichrist and his forces will be hunting down all believers in Yeshua, those who will not deny him. That's Luke. If you look in Luke 17, verse 34 through 37, I'll read that. "In that night there will be 2 in one bed. The one will be taken and the other left." Verse 34. 2 women will be grinding together. The one will be taken and the other left. Verse 35. 2 men will be in the field. The one will be taken and the other one left. Verse 36. And they answered and asked, "Where, Lord?" And he said, "Wheresoever the carcass body is, there the eagles will be gathered together." That's taken to one's death, not raptured. Israel's salvation out of their tribulation had not yet occurred at this point in time, but I believe it is so close to Christ's return for the Jewish believers in him as well as the Gentiles. It is sometime within that last half of the 7 years of tribulation period. Once the heavens are shaken, he will return for those left alive. This redemption and salvation is the rapture. So I hope that helps you understand the time of Jacob's trouble, the events that occur at that time, when the Messiah will return to rescue them out of their tribulation, when the dead in Christ rise, when the rapture occurs at the moment that occurs, and they're saved out of their trouble. It all comes together in one event. The second return of Christ will be right after that, and I don't think too much longer after that. So I wish you a happy day and shalom.